Hello and welcome to the Jocelyn Moore Show. I'm your host, Jocelyn Moore, and as always, we're here to inform, inspire, and entertain with dynamic conversations that matter. For history lovers, this is a show you do not want to miss. We turn our attention to Midland Cemetery outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a historical site with deep roots extending beyond the Civil War era. Join us as we share insights into the significant burial ground and the powerful stories it holds from the important period in our nation's history. Today, I am thrilled to introduce you to a truly dedicated historian. Joining us from Stilton, Pennsylvania, Barbara Barksdale, the founding president of the Friends of Midland and the steward of the historic Midland Cemetery in Pennsylvania. Barbara has been deeply involved in the significant work of restoring the Midland Cemetery and its history. She is known by many and introduced around the country as the Cemetery Lady.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. But before we dive into the history of Midland Cemetery, I read that you were fighting for Black history for a long time. Tell us about that.
Somewhere around, it seemed like 100 years ago, when I was in third grade in school, I had a teacher who, at the time, and think about this, it was not too long after Brown versus the Board of Education that I started school. And by the time I got to third grade, the teacher was talking about Abraham Lincoln and other things that pertain to history. And that's when she said that we were nothing but slaves. And so that hurt my heart. I talked to my mom about it. And from that point forward, I just been trying to dig into our history from the time of third grade right on through until now. So that's how I kind of got started with the love of history.
Do you believe, this is what I believe it starts at home, with the family. Because just like you said, you went to school, the teacher would say you're nothing but slaves. And that's a very negative effect on a young child. Well, any age, on a young child like that.
By the time I got into 7th grade and 8th grade, I was asking my teachers then, because my sister had loaned me some of her books that she had received concerning Black history. And I asked them if I could, if we could talk about this in school. They took the books, they went through them, and they returned them to me like a week later and said that no, that they couldn't use them. They couldn't look at me. They couldn't explain to me why. They just returned them in the same box that they had taken them from and just pushed them over to me. And that was the end of it. And so by the time I got to 9th grade, I was starting, as they said, a little riot trying to get Black history taught in school. And it took some years before I could really go back to that same school and talk to them about the history that was in their own backyard, the African American slave cemetery.
Something. Okay, let's move on. Could you explain to our viewers how the name Cemetery Lady came about? Cemetery Lady.
Well, it came about because I started volunteering at the historic Midland Cemetery. I refer to it as the historic Midland Cemetery now, but at the time it was just a cemetery where my grandfather was or is buried at. And with that being said, with my young son in the car, he was only like 10, 11 years old, I said, since we were diverted in January of that particular year to go past the cemetery, I didn't realize how big the cemetery was. So I decided I was going to try to clean up my grandfather's grave plot, and not knowing exactly where he was buried at, other than the fact that when I was a child, my parents would, especially my mom, since it was her dad, would go into the woods and put down the flowers from our garden and come back out of the woods and go on about our merry way on Memorial Weekend. So I thought, well, I can just go in there and pick a spot and say, this is in honor of my grandfather, and go from there. Well, come that summer when I started looking and trying to make sure that I had permission to go on the grounds, that's when I found out that the cemetery had been condemned. And from that point forward, I tried my best to get to find the owners, find out who was responsible for the cemetery, and so on and so forth, just to make sure that I could clean up my grandpa. In the meantime, somebody said something somewhat derogatory, saying, "Oh, you're going to clean up your grandfather and nobody else." Well, I love a challenge. So at that point, I decided, well, you know what? I'm not going to clean up my grandfather until I get everybody else's done. And hence, now we have the Midland Cemetery. And it's looking good.
You just said that someone said to you, you're going to clean your grandfather's, but no one else, right? Now, the person who said it to you, what were they going to do? Were they going to start cleaning, their loved ones, spot or what?
Well, actually, they didn't do anything. And that was my thing. I was like, well, it's your grandfather, your grandparents up here also. Your ancestors are up here also. What are you going to do? And that was nothing. Nothing at all. In fact, you know what? I'm going to show you a picture of what I walked into when I first got started with this, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Here we go.
Wow.
This is Midland Cemetery when I first started over 30 years ago, about 34 years now for me, 34 going on 35 years. And this is Midland Cemetery. And this is what the township, the codes department had condemned at that time. They had condemned it sometime before I got started. In fact, they told me that I was told that if I was to go on the cemetery and do anything, I would probably end up in jail. So again, here comes another challenge. And of course, I got onto the cemetery and I started trying to clean it up. And I'm going to show you something else too that might be of interest to the people, because I had to throw this picture in here. And of course, it looks like, oh God, there's a whole bunch of little kids on the field. So what does that have to do with the cemetery? Well, the same picture that I just showed you prior to this one, if you take a look at the background behind the house that is here in the picture, and you'll see a little bit of the road up towards the right side of the picture.
Right. Oh, I see it.
Okay, but you'll also see all those trees on the other side of the road, all those trees from right to left and left to right and up and down. That is Midland Cemetery. That's what I walked into. The picture that I took here, I happened to be sitting in on the stands, and this was at a PB game because my son is either on the field. I don't know his number from this point, but he's sitting there in the on the field there, learning how to play football. And one day I just happened to be going through the pictures and I realized that, oh my dear God, there's the house that's across the street. There's the electrical pole that's dead center of the trees, basically. And that pole actually is on top of Midland Cemetery. That piece of street that you see is part of Midland Cemetery. And so it was just astonishing to me to see it from that view once I realized what it was. But to go back to the other one, this is when you're walking through the cemetery. All right. And jumping over the briars and all the broken down logs that might have fallen during a storm or something like that. So it really is a huge difference. And I'll show that as we're going through our conversation here to see the difference of what it takes to clean up a cemetery. In this picture here, you'll see some of the people from the Pennsylvania conservationists that came in to start helping cutting down the trees. And that house that you could see in the previous picture, you can see a glimmer of it in the background of this particular picture, up above the heads of the people that are in there to help cut down the trees.
I want to go back to, you said something about you were going to be arrested if you were trying to clean up the cemetery in the beginning.
Yes.
Why? I mean, why were you going to be arrested? I don't understand that.
Yeah, the reason why is because I'm not going to say his name, but the man that worked at the codes department at that time had condemned the cemetery. And the purpose was so that they could use that prime land, okay, for housing. All right. So their thing was that they had it condemned. It had been condemned for a while before I even got started. And so that's why they, eminent domain type thing. and they were going to move the bodies, so to speak, move the bodies and use it for housing. Well, with me stopping that by exposing this information about the cemetery and my grandfather, that put a little kibosh to it, as they say, and that stopped them from having housing there because it's prime land. It's on the top of the mountain, basically. You can look across the Susquehanna River. It's a wonderful view. You know, if it wasn't for the cemetery, I probably would love to have a house up there, but nope, that's not going to be it. So, and unfortunately, the same person that had condemned the cemetery also had his own mother buried there. And he had her body and somebody else's associate's body moved over to what they call the William Howard Day Cemetery. So he knew what was going on. He took preventive cares for his own ancestors, but everybody else was just going to be on their own, you know.
All for the dollar, right?
All for the
All for the
dollar.
dollar.
And
Oh,
nine
wow.
times out of 10, when they're doing the excavation of
Right.
a body, if it's not in a vault or if it's not in a good solid coffin, you're not going to get a bunch of bones. And he told me at that time that all they could recover of his mother's body. Now, keep in mind, this man was quite up in age to begin with. So that meant that she had been laying to rest there for a number of years. And he said, we only got enough to fill a shoebox. All right. So, but that was his way of taking care of his mom.
Taking care of his mom. Well, just think about all the homes that are built on top of a cemetery. You just don't know. I think about that sometimes.
And you're so right. It's not just the homes. It is the federal buildings, like up in New York with the old slave cemetery that was there, discovered some years ago. Um, I was down at the Summers Museum and Archives down there in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Blakely was the one who was supposed to be on the same round table with me, but instead, in which I don't, say, hey, look, go ahead and do this. But he was charged with getting the bodies, the remains of those folks out of that cemetery and making sure, their age or their information on them, but they were reinterred at that site. And they did have to move the federal building over from its original plans. But you'll find cemeteries, whether it's black, white, or indifferent, that are covered by macadam, like part of Midland Cemetery is mailboxes, gas stations, Walmarts, anything, almost everything that's out there. There's somebody under something. Ashes to ashes and dirt to dirt. So you don't know who is blowing in the wind right now. But yeah, there's houses, there's playgrounds. I can tell you some of the names of playgrounds within Pennsylvania that are covering the graveyards, the cemeteries, plots,
Mm.
whatever. Yeah.
Whew. All right, moving on. Who is buried at Midland Cemetery, and who were the first people known to be buried there?
Well, some of the backstory on this is Midland Cemetery started around 1795, and that's what I have on our monuments up there saying circa 1795. And that's because, Pennsylvania, one of the 13 original colonies, imported slaves, and so therefore these people had to be buried somewhere. The Pennsylvania state law did say that if you had slaves, that they could be buried on your property, and it was up to you, your discretion, if you wanted them outside of the fencing or next to your people of Caucasian race, or you could have them at the end of your property line. So when I started doing all the research, I found that the majority of these folks were buried at the end of their property lines coming together. So with that being said, we're talking about those who were enslaved at that time. And Pennsylvania was a slave state. It was one of the first to start abolishing it as a ritual to see if this was something that could be done in other states. But then not only did we have those who were enslaved, we had the freedom seekers. You heard of the Mason-Dixon line, which is between Maryland and Pennsylvania. In fact, there is a road at the very end of Pennsylvania that says Freedom Road. So, Most people think that, oh, you get to Freedom Road or you get to the Mason-Dixon line and you're free. Well, that's not true. Because slavery was still in Pennsylvania all the way up until 1854, somewhere in that time period, especially over across the river in New Cumberland or Cumberland County. So we have not only those freedom seekers, but we also have those people of the United States Colored Troops, and I refer to them as the USCT, those who fought in the Civil War, because one of the largest camps to train them and organize them was here in Pennsylvania in Camp Lamont. And also those who were in the Buffalo Soldiers who fought in the Western Campaign. Buffalo Soldiers are from this region, many of them were those who also were the United States Colored Troops that went on to become Buffalo Soldiers and do the Western Campaign. We also have the men from World War I, II, and also the Korean War. We have those people known as the Tuskegee Airmen. Whether they were in the air or on the ground, they were still considered the Tuskegee Airmen. They went to Tuskegee. In fact, one of our people interred, or some of the family members of Mr. Imes, who became a teacher down at the Tuskegee Institute, is buried at Midland Cemetery. So we have a wide range of people, especially those who help with starting our community, those who started with helping with our churches, our schools, the hygienic school for colored children, a little bit of everybody. We have a wide variety, just like any other place in this United States or around this world. We have those from birth all the way through the old age of death.
You mentioned United States Colored Troops, right? Could you tell us more about them, such as what major war did they serve in, and what were their duties back then?
Okay, the United States Colored Troops. Well, let's go back to this. The Civil War started in 1861. By the time of 1862 to 63, the people who were enslaved were saying, hey, we can fight for our freedom too. So these men, and keep in mind, they could not be drafted in, they had to enlist. So we're having the United States Colored Troops, men who were volunteers who signed up to fight for their freedom as well as for their family and friends. So by the time 1863 came around with the Emancipation Proclamation, these men and some of the women who could sneak in there fought for their freedom. That was the main purpose for their fighting. But I'm sure the United States was trying to say at that time, because you had the United States, you also had the United Confederacy. So they were fighting for they wanted more land, they wanted more property, so to speak. And since we were considered, people of color was considered property, they were still fighting for that. They were fighting for that even beyond the Civil War, to talk about, well, how can we keep these? Well, we want to make them slaves again. They're still trying to do that today, but they were the Civil War ended in 1865. By 1866, they were looking at, oh, what can we do to wipe out the American Indians? So they wanted to they had the forces join with the old Confederates and the Yankees, as they refer to them, and they started with the Western Campaign to try to rid the United States of the American Indians that owned this property.
A lot of history they don't want us to know. They want the black people to know, the white people, they don't want us to know, period. They want to keep people down. Now, do you think when the colored troops, when they were in the war fighting for their freedom, when they fought for their freedom, it still was the same, correct? Everything was the same.
Well, unfortunately, there was no rule book at the end of the Civil War to say, okay, what can you do next? Okay, you got your freedom, so where do you go? And you still have the majority, even today, of people of color being down south. And for those who had left with the Great Migration, has gone back down south. What I'm finding, or have researched and learned, is the fact that many of these people, they try to get to what they thought was more of a neutral area. They thought they were, some of them tried to find family. Well, let's say a lot of them tried to find family. You had the Freedom Bureau that was, started so that people could find family, also get a little money or something to sustain their livelihood. But many people, there was no mad rush, so to speak, for people to get away because they didn't know where they were going to go. Oh, yes, we got our freedom, so you're going to have to pay us. But unfortunately, the payment was not in the way of cash. It was like, okay, we're going to let you stay here on this plantation, and at the same time, if you want to feed yourselves or clothe yourselves, you're going to have to and definitely house yourself. You're going to have to pay us now. We're not going to have to give you anything, unless you work the land. And so to speak, here we go, sharecropping. And many of the sharecroppings that you start looking at in the history books or even on the ancestry type sites, you'll find that sharecropping happened all the way up until the 60s, 1960s of, this century, the past century rather. And unfortunately, a lot of the people could not get the monies they needed to get away, nor they were scared. You're scared. Where are you going to go to? Unknown. And then you have the overseers and you have the landowners saying, well, there's nothing out there for you. You better just stay here. You're going to get killed or whatever, and that wasn't a lie because they were trying to kill us all because you had the different groups that was trying to take us out no matter what, or try to get us re-enslaved, while those old plantation owners were getting paid by the United States government because, oh yeah, you lost your property. So, we'll pay you, we'll give you some money. Just give us the information and we'll give you something back. But they wasn't giving us that 40 mules and 40 acres and a mule wasn't going to happen, So, anyway, the Civil War was a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing for us to start trying to look at different ways to survive, whether it was sharecropping or moving to the west or moving to the north or wherever, trying to find family that can go with you, the Great Migration to get away. It was quite sad. But at the same time, you're thinking about the American Indians too, who took in a lot of the people of color that helped them, whether they were enslaved and was able to buy people or whatever, but they weren't used as slaves per se, where you have the beatings and the whippings and you got to go get that cotton out the field, uh, it was just a hodgepodge. It was a mess. It was a real mess.
The colored troops were fighting. They were just hoping, I guess, deep down that, okay, once we fight, we would have our freedom. I'm sure a lot of them felt that way, right? It would be much better for us. Once we fight for our freedom, things will be on smooth, I don't know about smooth sailing, but it would be much, much better for us. We have to start somewhere.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, people were leaving from the South to seek better environment, but not everybody was going to be welcoming, and then you had people who say, oh, you're going to take our jobs, the other immigrants that was coming in, because maybe the potato famine or because they were trying to get away from other countries for a better environment, but then they come over here and act like they're the new plantation owner, the overseer, and they're going to act like the land that we've been sitting on for at that point maybe 200 years, they're going to come over and take the land, which at this point the majority of people owning this land here is not us, and so we're still trying to deal with the blessing and the curse. The blessing is that we fought for freedom. The blessing is that we were able to get that freedom, but they still try to step on us, and they still the curse is bringing other people in who are not of us, and those are the ones who can become successful. Those are the ones who act like they were the original owners of this land, So it's a lot of history that comes along with this. And unfortunately, with the Buffalo Soldiers going out west and helping, open up the Wild West out there, you have all the people running out there for gold. They wasn't letting us get into the gold mines unless we were working for somebody else, and all the lands out west and the reorganizations of the United States was happening at the same time. And then at the same time, they're wiping out the American Indian. The Trail of Tears that's happening, people are being put on reservations instead of plantations. They were, if you take a look at the 1890 census, by then, almost all of the American Indians were all, removed, killed, and so how can you do that? And it wasn't us that was doing it, even though we were the Buffalo Soldiers. you know it we had those commanders and those people, those new overseers, if you want to call them that, that was saying, okay, well, we want this land, we're going to take this land. Oh, the hills of gold, the black hills and everything else. So we go from United States colored troops to Buffalo Soldiers. It's a real trip. But anyway,
this might be off topic, but Christopher Columbus discovered America.
How can you discover something that's already been here and people sitting on it? Talking about a daggone wall. You should have put up a wall around them.
That's in the history books. That's what I thought for years when I was growing up. We were taught that.
Yeah. I mean, I was taught the same thing, but I learned that no, he did not. If they want to change the name or something, well, they did try to change.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. But, yeah. No, Christopher Columbus was what? He's the father of the great old good disease that goes from person to person to person around this world, as he did his little voyages up and down the coastline of the Americas and all the different islands out there in the near the Bahamas, the Indies, the West Indies and all that. So you have, I can't pay any tribute to that man.
I know, but it's still in the books. They want you to know that he discovered America. So how did this impact the area, state, and country? Referring back to the type of work that people of color had back then.
Well, okay, so let's go from, we had the plantation and we had the Civil War, and then we go on to the Buffalo Soldier. And these are the kind of people, Buffalo Soldiers started around 1867, and they were following right on through it until they actually kept the name going until somewhere around 1930s, 1940s, somewhere in there. And those people, and I keep saying those people, we're talking about the people of color that were able to try to get good properties by working hard for those properties, trying to educate your children. So some of these same people that were enslaved helped to start some of the first churches in this particular area. I think of Reverend J.J. Jones, who was a slave out in Arkansas, who ended up in the Wilberforce, Ohio area and becoming a missionary, and then came here to the Harrisburg, Stilton region. And that church, which is in Stilton here, which is the Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, is still in existence today, and it still has good membership. And we have the people that helped create quite a few of our churches around here. The First Baptist Church and the Goodwin Memorial Church, I traced them back to Mr., I'll call him Mr. for respectful sake, Mr. William Goodwin. And he's buried at Midland Cemetery, and he had been enslaved. And so a lot of the history that I'm finding here all goes back to slavery. Even for Mr. Harris, who took the name of his favorite slave owner, he came out of slavery, obviously, because it's in his obituary. It's in actually the Pennsylvania state records shows that he took the name of his favorite slave owner. And so they helped to start the churches, and because of the churches, you end up with education, you end up with schools. And so Mr. Samuel Cole, who was a United States color troop person, he has a beautiful plaque, indicating a USCT, but he was very instrumental in trying to get to school, along with Peter Sullivan Blackwell, who became the very first Black councilman for the borough of Stilton in 1904. He and several others from the monumental AME Church, which was ground was broken by Mr. Fields, who was a former slave. And these people got together and said, hey, we want education because, you're giving it to the whites. What about the blacks? Well, there was an old color school there, and they put it together, and these men said, okay, let's we're going to have the school. And the school ended up becoming the hygienic school for colored children, which, by the way, I don't know if you listened to the news today or the last 24 hours, or if it was even publicized down there in Maryland, but our steel mill that started in 1866, which is one of the oldest in the United States, is going to be put on, they're actually going to start laying everybody off at the end of June of this year coming up. And so these men that are buried at Midland Cemetery that helped start the schools, that helped form the churches, that helped to create their Black communities, also worked at these steel mills. This Pennsylvania State Mill, which is Steelworks down here, and they're laid out there in Midland Cemetery, whether they died because they were injured or they died because of age, because of sucking in the pig iron into their lungs and getting black lung. And they're the ones who helped to get their families started here, buying homes, having their wages, set aside so they could have some kind of real estate, so that they could have their churches, have their schools, have their grocery stores, have their community, which was beneficial to everybody, especially with the steel mill had started the school system for the borough of Stilton. They actually furnished and built the schools for the kids in Stilton, which subsequently helped to build the hygienic school for colored children. So how did they help? What did they do? They did a little bit of everything the best they could, especially for the women. God knows we can't forget about the women who actually supported all these men who were in the military, or the men that helped to start the schools or whatever. I mean, you have the Women's Auxiliary, of the American Legions. You have the women who helped to start and work with the American Red Cross, even though they're not they were not really signified as the American Red Cross, but they were women who was working in each other's homes to wrap up the bandages for these men. We have the women that helped to support the men that went out for World War I. Whether they knew how to read or write or nothing, they were functional illiterates. They still were able to function in these wars. They were also able to function at these here steel mills or the stone quarries, or there be the driver for the fire trucks, which was the horses and the big old tank on the back of the wagon, So that's why I'm here now, because my father came from the South. My mother came from the Alexandria, Virginia region, DC, Maryland, area. And that's why we're up here. That's why I'm here, because my great-grandparents and grandparents and everybody migrated up here for work, for community, for churches, for a little bit of everything that still exists today, and hopefully will be existing, in the next couple of 100 years.
Mm. I appreciate the colored troops, people back then, fighting for their freedom, fighting hard for their freedom. They know what it was to fight. A lot of people today, like the young kids, do not know anything about this. Or even the older people do not know anything about this. And you're giving a lot of energy. And also you talk about the women who helped, the men in the war. I didn't know that. They played a major role in all of this. A major, major role in all of this.
And we had, like I mentioned earlier, we had women that actually was part of the war. Kathy Williams, who was a Buffalo soldier until she got shot, and they found out that she didn't have all the vital parts that called herself a man.
Oh, I already thought it was just men.
No.
Oh.
These women, even today, they want to go out there and fight and hold a gun.
Oh, I didn't know
some
that.
of them are better than those men,
Oh, well, we know that.
The backbone of everything around here.
Yes.
And this girl's a good old woman,
That's true. Oh.
But yeah, honey, no, they were out there. I mean, come on, you done got Harriet Tubman. And
right, yeah, of course.
Right, but
right.
I'm just saying, some of them got into the war, and then we had those women who followed behind the areas, and they did that's how restaurants and things like that got to be moving. I mean, everything in this country is at least 15 miles apart, because that's what they could walk in a day's time. And behind that was a woman somewhere who was going to fix that meal or satisfy that man some other kind of way. Okay. So I'll put it like that.
And you have a lot, just like you said, Harriet Tubman. She did the Underground Railroad. There's a lot of black women that people do not know about. Well, you might as well say a lot of black people, a lot of black men we don't know about. We know about Frederick Douglass. We know about him. I believe when he was a slave, he was taught to read. Right? Is that correct?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, and he was good at speaking also, but
Right.
there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of unknowns that are the
Unknown
true backbones of
bones.
the Frederick Douglasses,
True.
that will never be known unless somebody has documented that history. Those people that helped to start these here foundations, these churches, that helped to build the Golden Gate Bridge, they're just clumped into one person or one entity, but people will never know what their strike on the rails did for the rest of the world. And that's why it's so important for us to document, to grab the history from our ancestors, whether by research or by sitting down and talking to your parents, grandparents, or whomever is alive, your aunts, uncles, cousins, next door neighbor, get your young kids out there to really get them to start trying to do the research, whether it's on Ancestry or Family Org or whatever that's available to do the research, but digging into those hidden places, into basements of your churches, the basements of the old schools, the fallen down buildings, to make sure that this history is gathered and that it's taught, that it is saved. Go to those cemeteries and start documenting those headstones, making sure that you have the first and last name if you can, also the date that they started, when they were buried or when they became alive, and what did they do in between. Just like you asked the question, what did these people do in your town or around this here world? They did help to start these churches. They did start to help the schools, and they were very significant in making sure that they fought for civil rights, that they could do the Brown versus Board of Education, that we can sit and talk on a podcast like this today. We need to make sure that we are educating not only the young ones, but the old ones too, because sometimes the old ones forget where they came from. We need to make sure that we are getting this history out there. No, we are not going anywhere. We've been here for 400 years. Where the heck you think we're going to go? What we're going to do, we're going to go to the library. We're going to go to the archives. We're going to go to everything else and make sure that you understand what we are all about. We're history. We're history.
What they say, knowledge is what?
Power. But they don't want us to have that. And it's not like we're trying to have power over anybody, because the ultimate power in my life is God. So I don't need to have that kind of power. What I just want you to have is equality. I want you to have respect. I want you to make sure that, you don't walk down the street and start looking down on people. We need to be able to say that we are, just as good as you are. We may not have the same, you don't have to have a lot of money to be happy. We just want to have that respect, that equality. We don't need to be redlined on buying a house. We don't need to be treated at a different school, not get the same kind of books that everybody else gets, or the same kind of education. We want to have the same kind of rights when we're saying, oh, can I get that credit card? Oh, you're black, so you're going to get a lower credit score. Come on. Where do we start? Why do we have to go through this?
Only the color of your skin make a big difference to a lot of people, the color of your skin.
And that's because, see, that is taught, though. That is taught. And so, well, how they want to whitewash something. It's taught. You're not born with that. It's taught. So we need to make sure that if you're going to teach something, teach the right thing. I mean, how many times do you have a person going out there, they got to get a tan? They're going to lay in a tanning booth or on the daggone shore. It's taught,
But like I said, knowledge is key. It's power. But some people think that we want to take over. We want to be on top. We want to make all the decisions. And like you said, it's not trying to do that. We want to be a part. We want to be equal, just like you are. Treated the same.
Right. That separate but equal is over and done with. you know. I mean, and the cemetery is my cemetery is one of those things that is where you have separate but equal, because this was is a cemetery for people of color, and down the road is a cemetery called Baldwin that is for the whites. But the sad thing about it, within the whites cemeteries, as you can go through many of them, they have a section for the Croatians or the Slavics, for the Jews. They have a cemetery for the Italians. They have a section within the section of the cemeteries. And so even within their own culture, they can't even get over the fact that they had to separate themselves because of race or religion or background within their own white cemetery. In the black cemetery, you ain't gonna have, well, everybody clumped in there together. You're black, you're okay, get in the ground.
Yeah.
But at Midland, we do have just a small portion that, and I think it's like less than 10 people that are buried there in one corner. But the difference is their graves are facing north to south, where ours are facing east to west. And so, and it's only there because of how the land was back in the day, over over 100 years ago. And then we also have a person by the name of David Castle, who was known to in the research indicating that he was a friend to the color. He was an abolitionist. All right. But the thing is that he's not buried there. He has a headstone there, and he has an identical headstone in the Hummelstown Cemetery, where his body is laid to rest. All right. So, there's a lot of little tidbits of history. What I try to tell people when I'm talking to them is the fact that everybody is going to be black when they die, because there ain't not a single thing that you can find, bird, beast, or man, that if you were to leave him out here and expose, he's going to be black as black. Okay. Now I'm already black, so I can't go any further. But some of those other people, yeah, watch. Ain't none of them going to be buried white. They all going to be.
That's true.
And everything. And then how much white dirt do you ever find around here? You've never seen no white dirt in your life. Ain't no white dirt around here.
Let me think. No.
Ain't no white dirt there.
No.
Sand is sand. Sand is not dirt. Okay? And even sand is tanned.
That's true. You are absolutely right.
No, really.
No,
Thank you.
Oh, right. Boy, the time is going by so quickly. I'm going to ask you this question.
Uh-huh.
I'm looking at the cemetery now. I mean, wow, what big change. Why was the cemetery condemned? Look at that.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And we're still cutting trees down. The tree that's up in front of the white fence there, that one had to come down because it was diseased and hollowed out. So we had to take it down. As they call it, a widow maker. We had to get it down before, branches kept falling down and popping somebody in the head. But we've come a long way. This picture, and just to show you this quickly, you'll see lines on the grass there. And we have volunteers. We had about 100 volunteers come in, and they were marking out the cemetery so that we could do ground penetrating radar. We have done linear. We're working with the various colleges, IUP, and Pennsylvania, Penn State University. I've worked with Elizabethtown University, Dickinson College students. I was the community liaison for them for about 8 years to bring them in so that they could do oral history gathering. So a lot has happened with Midland over the years. We just had some trees taken down last week. We had more survey done where you see those cars. Their cars are sitting on top of the cemetery because that road ran over. Back in the 30s, they put the road over the cemetery. So on the other side in that house, on the back, which you can't see from this angle, is the rest of the cemetery across the street. So we just had our monument put on a new foundation that will show some of the names of the slaves that are buried at Midland in Sweater Township, as well as the name of one of the obituaries of Mr. Harris that I mentioned earlier, who had taken the name of his favorite slave owner. And it has a lot of little tidbits of history, has the USCT and all that good stuff on it. So we've come a long way.
Yes, I see. It's a big difference.
Yes.
Oh my, it's a big difference.
And with all that being said, we are now on the National Register of Historic Places. That happened April 2 years ago, and we were able to unveil this here plaque.
Wow.
Just this past year. last Memorial Day.
Okay. You know what, Barbara? I wish we could continue talking, but it's that time, but in closing, I'm glad you brought that up. In closing, if these cemeteries could speak directly to us, what do you believe they would tell us?
Don't stop forgetting about us. Continue to restore, preserve, and use us for educational purposes. And that way, our story will last forever.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Will last forever. And I know the families are so happy what you have done. Like all over the country, the families. Have you heard from some of the families?
I have not heard from families in particular, but various cemeteries have reached out to me from across the United States over the years to ask what can they do to take care of their cemeteries. Just recently got a call last week, I think, from Alabama, and then somebody from Ohio, various areas. I'm also associated with the Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds, and we're helping cemeteries across the entire state, those that have the bodies of the United States colored troops buried in them, so that we can make sure that they are, if we can help them with any facts or figures or whatever that we can, share with them. Why reinvent the wheel? Because we've already done it, so we try to share our knowledge with them and let them know that they're not alone, because many times people get out there, and whether it's about a cemetery or something else, if they feel alone, then sooner or later they just drop the cause. So if you have that purpose and passion, we're here to help you out.
I just love what you do. I really do.
And I just want to add this to you, and hopefully not taking too much of your time here, but I have been gifted and blessed with helping others to do research on their things that they're trying to do, their stories, their books. And what I'm trying to do, normally I'm asked to help with research and also editing of some of the books. So I just wanted to share this one here on Isaiah Dorman. Can you see that? Isaiah Dorman, okay? And Isaiah Dorman was from Pennsylvania, and this was written by a dear friend of mine, Layla Morton Pingra, and she's out in the Dakotas. And Isaiah Dorman, which was not spoken about over the years. You heard of General Custer, right?
Of course, yes.
Okay, Custer's Last Stand.
You're right.
This was the only Black on the battlefield, and he finally got a headstone several years ago. And this book is being used at the national parks out there in the Dakotas to talk about him. And he has he died on the field, but people didn't know about him. He was a scout. He was often enlisted by the United States government to help as a scout, because he could speak some of the American Indian language. And I'm just trying to make sure that Isaiah Dorman is not forgotten. That's the history that we're trying to protect. Whether it's somebody in our state or outside our state, we try to protect it.
Thank you. You his mouthpiece. Thank you very much. As you see, everyone, you have the contact information for Barbara. Barbara, I can't thank you enough for sharing your expertise and passion with us. Thank you so very much for being with us today. For our viewers at home watching, if you like what you see, subscribe to the Jocelyn Moore Show. Want to be a guest on our show? Head over to our website, www.jmentertainment.info. On the homepage, click on About and follow directions to be a guest. If you have any questions about today's show or past shows or future shows, just click contact on our website and submit a message. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, take care and keep watching.